In the 1960s, Tasmania was the best state in Australia to live. Historically, it has always been able to keep up with, but in most cases, surpass the living standards of the rest of the country. Nowadays, it is drastically behind in almost every single statistic. Hi, my name is Mason, and today we'll be looking at the political history of Tasmania and how exactly we've gotten to this point.
To do this, we must first understand the geography of the state.
From the time of its first settlement, Tasmania has been markedly one of the most resource-rich regions on the planet. Due to its position on the volcanic Ring of Fire, it has abundant and accessible minerals. Accessible not only in its ease of extraction, but also in its ease of access. Copper, zinc, iron, lead and tungsten are just a few of the resources sitting under its crust. To add to this uniquely extensive river system is easily dammable, extremely reliable, and great for agriculture. And if all that wasn't enough for success, Tasmania also holds Australia's most productive agricultural land. Its mineral-rich volcanic plains produce half of the world's opium. We start this video with a foreign upside-down concept. Labor has ruled Tasmania for 20 years, and it has been running on the same policy for these 20 years.
In 1964, Labor had won the Tasmanian state election 10 times in a row. It kept winning because it kept being effective. It promised to develop mining and then followed through with the Zeon Acts. It was unique among states in that it enacted workers' rights acts above the federal government rather than following the federal government's lead. It legalised unions and the creation of other organisations, and very, very importantly, it developed hydroelectricity with such enthusiasm and with such effectiveness that the Labor Premier at the time, Eric Rees, to this day is remembered as Electric Eric because he had such a borderline autistic obsession with hydroelectricity, and that is the kind of leadership that we love to see. In Australian politics, having a nickname is usually an indication that you're doing a bad job. But who was this Eric Rees fella? Because you're going to see his name come up a lot in the video. He is a man of the people. He has no political education. He has, by the time of his first premiership, never read Marx, which is a major faux pas in the Labor Party, who was explicitly socialist at the time, or any ties to the landowning class of sheep ranchers. He is a very one-issue focused politician. He is very, very determined to industrialise the state, and he really, really, really wants to make sure that the workers get their fair share as it industrialises. He clears the way for mining with the Zeon Acts. He sets up all the policies for the hydroelectric dams from his premiership onwards. And he has a public school in Devonport, a major city in Tasmania, named after him, which I am shameful to announce is not called Electric High School, it's called Rees High School. His two premierships during the 1960s are Tasmania at its finest, when it's most ahead of the rest of the country. Even despite the massive geographic advantages Tasmania has, it cannot be understated how much his competent and reliable leadership led Tasmania forward during his premierships. But now comes the part where the video starts to get interesting. It is 1969 and Labor has ruled the state consecutively for 35 years, which is a countrywide record for any government anywhere of any party. It is not like Labor completely dominated the elections during these 35 years. It was more about a slight squeak through. They won by 5-2 seats for the last 35 years. Now, in this election, we have a new Liberal leader, and his name is Angus Buthain. And he is an interesting figure in that he has almost no economic policy other than less taxes, but his social policy is actually extremely good. This was Tas Liberal at its finest and one of the few times where it actually did exactly what it said it was going to do. Now, to get into the election specifics, both parties had 17 votes, and the Centre Party, run by one Mr. Lyons, had one singular vote. And Mr. Lyons decided that he was going to side with Liberal this time, causing a shift in government that I'm sure will last a long time and bring a lot of prosperity to the state. Spoiler alert, the coalition won't even make it to the next election. Angus Buthain's Liberal achieved many things during this period, the notable one being it lowered the age of voting to 18, especially important in a time period where boomers were literally being sent off to their death in Vietnam. I'm sure they would learn their lesson about the older generation suppressing the younger generations and never do that to a younger generation. Continuing on from that, they busted up a couple of monopolies, the hotel gambling monopoly. Much of this stuff, you kind of just have to take Tasmania's word for it because they do not have state transparency laws. They also enacted a couple more policies. They changed public school funding from $20 per child per year to $30 per child per year, which is a huge difference at the time. They also gave out additional welfare to older people to maintain their homes, which is a good policy by itself, but critics would argue
that the federal government was already doing that, and that state funding probably shouldn't have been used specifically for that. Moving on from that, their taxation policy was bonkers. A lot of what Liberal ran on during this election is that Labor was spending too much money, which is correct. They were in a slight deficit, but as mentioned, we don't know how much of a deficit because they have no state transparency laws. But we also know that they didn't do exactly what they promised to do, which was to scrap some of these infrastructure projects. They just left them. And then they spent more money on the aforementioned policies, and they, at the very least, slightly lowered the tax rates and slashed agricultural land duty taxes, which essentially meant they knocked out at least 5% of tax income. At least you can't tell me I'm lying, because absolutely nobody knows.
Open your eyes.
After all those policies were implemented, Kevin Lyons, leader of the Central Party and the only non-major party seat, realised that he had to do what all centrists are called to do by their gods, which is to cause absolute political havoc and confusion and collapse the government. After he did this, Labor was back in power, and it would continue to be in power for the remainder of this election cycle and another 2 election cycles.
So from 1973 to 1981, what are Labor's policies? Unfortunately, their primary focus during this era was reacting to global and national change. Those of you who know who was in federal government at the time will understand just how dire the straits were for Tasmania. Gough Whitlam, whilst bringing the rest of the country up to snuff, inadvertently screwed Tasmania repeatedly. Gough Whitlam's government lowered tariffs, exposing Tasmania business to foreign competition, and inadvertently caused the beginning of Tasmania's industry leaving the state entirely. Additionally, stagflation had kicked in, and the dollar was massively inflating. So a lot of political time was spent repeatedly raising wages, repeatedly raising welfare, and repeatedly raising the budgets of public schooling. Gough Whitlam's interventionism clashed with Eric Rees's interventionism. Massive damage was done to the Tasmanian economy. And whilst living standards did majorly increase, they increased far less than the rest of the country, and these living standard increases were not necessarily sustainable. Additionally, Gough Whitlam's government tried to trade equalise Tasmania with the mainland, which is a terrible idea because Tasmania has to import a lot of things and export a lot of things, and oftentimes, from year to year, this is unpredictable. Essentially, Gough Whitlam's autarky policies, which helped the country massively, destroyed Tasmania's economy because it was simply too small to equalise its own production and trade. Through no fault of its own really, this is the worst Tas Labor performance possibly ever. Due to a majority of the population not really understanding what was going on and why Tas Labor was performing so badly, support for the party waned, and Liberal would sweep the next election. Hello all, it is I. This is my first long form content. I would appreciate it if you commented the word banana, because we need engagement bait. With that said, like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. If not, tell me to f myself. I don't really give a Hope you enjoyed the video because I enjoyed making it. Bye bye.